So before we actually jump into using the convenience methods that views sometimes come with, I want to talk about request and response objects. So when we're making a request or when a request happens, there's a couple things that go on. One of them is it goes through this concept called middleware, which is basically like this middle ground between a request and a response. Think of it almost like a window. So a window itself, light passes through it to get into your house, and then light also passes through it to go outside. Middleware is the same sort of idea inside of every request. So the things that it does is, if we look at settings, it goes through all of these things. As you'll see here, it says security middleware, session middleware, authentication middleware, all of that stuff. That is the reason why we were able to see the request user when we ran that method. When we saw this in particular, that is coming through because of middleware. Middleware does some stuff in between coming to this actual function, which is really nice. And it's something important to think about. We're not going to go into it here, but it is something to think about that does happen, which makes Django that much more powerful and allows us to do certain sort of views themselves because that middleware exists, such as that security middleware does help us do all sorts of things. Now, in this case, what I want to talk about is more about that HTTP request object. So we already logged in here, this HTTP response here, but we can actually be a little bit more dynamic with it. So I'm going to remake the home function, and I'm going to say the response is equal to HTTP response. So this right there is actually creating the response. So I can change all sorts of stuff inside of this response by looking at the things, not in the request, but in the response itself. So if we do a search for HTTP response, we will get down to HTTP response objects versus the request objects. The request objects are what's coming through on this module itself. This is a response object. So when we printed out request, the methods that are available are right in here. So we have the scheme, the body, the path info, the method. We've already seen those things by doing that dir call, which gave us all of these right here. Notice that we see post, meta. We've got all sorts of stuff that's coming through here. And let's go back into that HTTP response. And this is how we're able to update generally how our response comes back to it. So when a request happens to our website sends back a response. And Django handles that interchange by going first through middleware, then first it's routed, and then it goes through middleware, and then it goes to a view, and then it goes back through middleware, and then it goes back to the user. So basically, whenever you go to a web page, any web page is pretty much something like this. We click on that URL. That URL is routed to something that handles it, and then something that handles it sends some data back, and that's called the response. So this is where we're at these HTTP response objects, and we can actually use this response to do all sorts of things. So like right here, as we see in this, we could actually write it inside of the Python shell, or we can write it inside of our view. So I'm going to copy this one and just put response here. Here is the text of a web page, and I'm going to return this response. So I'll save that, and I'm going to go ahead and comment out our old home function, and now we have our new home function. So if we go to our new home, we see that here's the text of the page, right? So I can write a bunch of responses. I could do this multiple times, as much as I'd like, save it, refresh, and it gives me that response, which is pretty nice. So we can play around with the different things. So we have response headers. So if I wanted to make them download an attachment, this is something that I can actually use to make them download said attachment. So then the response would just be an attachment, and that's how that works. But we can also do content and status code. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to change our status code from being a normal status code to being a page not found. We could just do status code equals to 404. We save that. We come back in here and refresh. If I inspect the element here and go to console, it says failed to load resources, server respond with a status of 404, not found. So the actual content that's coming through here is saying here's the text, but I could easily say page not found. And this is how we can render our own page not found methods, right? I mean, there are stuff for Django built in, as if we went here, that is a page that's not found as indicated by this error, but we can also make our own, which also means that I can do stuff to the request in here saying that the page wasn't found. So if I had model data, I could save data related to the request. I could do all sorts of stuff in here. Because I created this new status code, the end user might think it's not an actual real response, or it's not a real page, or it's not found. There's a few other things here that we can add in. So content, let's say, for instance, if we came in here and just said response.content equals to some new content, we save that, and we refresh in here. Notice that original content line, so this right here, goes away. If I change the order of it, let's see what happens. And we refresh. The order of it does actually affect how it's going to come out. So content is the entire content. So that last one, we actually created this HTML. We wrote some HTML inline stuff. So this right here is actually the ability to write that content. So that is content. That's what we would actually end up putting there inside of our content call. That's what we would want. And the status code would probably be 200. That's the status code that we would actually want, and that's probably the status code that's the default. And I can see that by just printing out the status code before I set it. So if I printed out response.status code, I should be able to see the default. So I refresh in here, go back into the terminal, scroll all the way to the bottom, and it shows me the default being 200. Okay, cool. So that is some more stuff on HTTP response. Again, you can use it to actually force downloads. And this is an example of something like that. We could set a content type, meaning the type that we're sending back. And we can actually see what the content type is by doing print response.content type, save that, and refresh on our page. We look into terminal, and we might be getting some errors here. I think we are because of the session. So we are getting some errors here because I didn't actually update the session. So I'm going to just do a quick python manage.py migrate and back to running the server again. Refresh in here. And now it's giving us an attribute error of content type. So going back into the directory, I don't see the content type. So I'll do dir of that response. Before we did it of the request. This time I'm going to do it of the response. And now what we see here, we've got a few things. We have cookies, we have flush, seekable, serialized, status code. I don't see anything in here for specifically content type. So we can set the content type, but it's not as easy to just grab it, right? So if I wanted to set the content type in here, then I could do that with this response. So content type equaling to, let's say, text/HTML. That's likely what our content type would be anyway. So I refresh that, and there we go. I could do content type text.json. I don't think that's the content type. That's probably not. So let's see, content type for JSON. And this is a meme type, and it's application/JSON, not text/JSON. I did know that, but I just wanted to show you guys really quickly how you'd find out the content type of different things. And notice the page or the HTML is rendered differently. So I could actually have a response of JSON instead of HTML, but I don't want that. I want a response of just standard text/HTML. Okay, so I'm going to leave it here as far as the HTTP response is concerned, but I will bring in a couple other ones, which is HTTP response redirect, and also we can use this by quickly saying define redirect somewhere, and we can take in a request, and we can just return our redirect. So I'll return HTTP response redirect to some path. So some path. This could also be a URL such as like http://joincfe.com, something like that. And then since I created this view, I need to add it into my URLs by first importing it and then adding it as its own URL, redirect somewhere, and then I'll just say redirect. Here, we save that, refresh, and then I just go to redirect, and it redirects me to that sum path. So again, there are some other advantages of using the built-in response methods or classes rather, that Django has, but there's more convenient things than just doing this. I wanted to mention this before jumping into those convenient things because this stuff is a little bit more challenging to get it going, and it's something you might be interested in learning more of. If you are interested in learning more of, comment below, because then we could build a whole section based off of HTTP response and all that. Because this is much more about function-based views, not in the sense of HTTP response views. So function-based views are convenience views that we're going to be going through. These are technically still function-based views, but they're not the function-based views that we really want to talk about. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. And definitely, if you want to see more about HTTP response, please let us know in the comments below and what specifically you want to know. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next one.